Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today, I'll be talking about a book that was sent to us by the creator, Hunter Delaney. Came with this nice note that says, Carson and Sean, thanks for all you both do with Living the Line. You guys help keep me going while working on this book, and I can't thank you enough for that. Enjoy. Thanks, so much for the book, but also, Hunter, thank you for the note. Like, things like that when we're having a hard weekend. The grind of it all is getting to us, like knowing it has an impact on people is really nice to hear. Also, holy crap, I really enjoyed this book that Hunter sent over. I don't even like in talking to Hunter since reading it last night. I don't even think Hunter knew that I'm pretty much a gigantic metalhead and into heavy music and stuff like that. And he has sent over his history of hardcore, which is awesome because hardcore was definitely like probably the weaker version of hardcore that was around in the 90s was one of my gateways into the heavy metal and heavy music in general. So I was really excited to read this, and then as I read through it, I was extra excited about the book because it really filled in the history up to the point where I would have started listening to the music. And I'm not someone who's naturally inclined to go chasing a trail of influences backwards. I'm usually interested in where things going next. So a book like this really like solidified for me a lot of names that I've heard and kind of showed me their importance in the scene, and that's really super helpful. And then that kind of thing sparks my interest to want to go back and listen to a lot of this music. So Hunter, you've really like I've already listened to the first couple bands in here, and I'll just be working my way through the book. I think this is also I'm recording this just a few days after Ed Piskor passed, which I think has been messing with all of us in the community. He's such a seminal figure, and it's hard to like. I want to compare this to what Ed did with the hip hop family tree of presenting like a history of a music, but I also don't want to like I don't know jump on that so soon after the wound. But this book really feels like the entry for hardcore, and I think it's as informative and as interesting and well done as Hip Hop Family Tree was, and as important in terms of getting a history out there. So really, I have high praise for this book. I've got a bunch of notes in it that I'm going to leave in there that I'm not even going to cover because I don't want to give away too much in the book. Those are all for my own sake, music listening. But I do want to go through and show like kind of what this book is, talk a little bit about it, point out some things I like. But I'd really encourage you, whether you like heavy music or not, to read this book. I think it's a really interesting bit of history just about our society as well. In the beginning, you get Hunter introducing himself as basically the tour guide for this, and this is somewhere at some point in time. And Hunter's trying his best to explain succinctly what hardcore is, not just as a music style, but as a lifestyle. I was never that far into it where I took it on as like an identity that I tried to live out. It was just a type of music I liked. But in reading this book, I realized how much of the values of the hardcore community kind of shaped my life and my values as well, just ambiently because of exposure to the music at the time that I grew up and whatnot. So you kind of get this introduction to hardcore, some of the types of people you see. There's an explanation of like the whole point of the mosh pit and like the idea behind the mosh pit, the emotional release. Also, just kind of some of the rules of the pit, like the only way out of the pit is to go through the pit. That's a part of the concerts in general that I've never liked is the getting hit part of concerts. I'm the guy that should be there should be a fifth guy in this list of typical usual suspects of hardcore. I'm the guy that's always in the back with my arms folded, just trying to enjoy the performance of the musicians without getting punched. And so there's always that guy at a metal show or a hardcore show, and that's always me. My problem is if I get hit, I get violently angry, and I want to get in an actual fight, so I can't behave in the way you should in a pit. Um, On this page here, there's a bit of dialogue I really like. Yet another difficult thing for some to comprehend without experiencing it. Hardcore is kind of like the insane metalhead cousin of punk that likes rap. So in terms of a description of the music, and I also just like the influences that come together to create it and the interests of the people within the community. That's like a pretty damn good explanation of it. That's very much like my youth was. Those were the three things that were very influential. I was more of the metalhead and with an interest in rap. The band I was in, those guys were more interested in punk and ska, and so that all kind of blends together to being very accessible to the hardcore scene and the elements in it. So I think that's a really great description. The narrative of the structure from there goes into basically, okay, now we're going to jump into the actual history of hardcore. And to do that, there's a time travel story, and there's even a mention of like, oh God, not a time travel story. And that was my first reaction as well. Like, really, can you just give us the history without the time travel story? But as I'll point out later, the time travel story actually holds a very important function in how this book works and how it explains hardcore and how it kind of wraps up some of what goes on in that music genre, the people that are affiliated with it. So at first, at this point in the book, I was a little skeptical of that, but I became very sold on it later, and I'll get to that as I get to those pages. So according to Hunter, the history of hardcore goes back to Washington, D.C. in 1982, and talking about the band that came out of there called Bad Brains. Bad Brains is definitely a band I had heard of before, but not a band that I ever really listened to. I've already gone and listened to them and really realized, oh my God, this is like the beginning of so much stuff I like. Why have I not known about this band? The other thing that was really cool to find out about Bad Brains, and that I just really had no idea about in the history of hardcore, is that all of the members in the band were black, and they started out in kind of like a rock jazz fusion style, and then punk got introduced, and that all came together. And from listening to them, they obviously were interested in ska and like dub, and they mixed all that together. So that really informed me. I had no idea that hardcore also was originally a black music that then white people like basically just colonized the hell out of it. Just, you know, from growing up listening to that music, there really weren't that many black musicians in bands that I was paying attention to or within the scene itself. I've seen recently in a lot of the hardcore bands coming out, there's been a lot of crossover between the rap community and the hardcore community, and there seems to be a real movement like going along with the Black Lives Matter that's manifesting itself in hardcore music. But I really honestly had no idea that the origins of it go back to a band where all the members were black. So that was really, really cool, interesting historical fact that I learned about while reading this book. And just the band themselves, it's like, oh my God, it influenced so many people that I think are like my seminal influences. Even though it's not the music itself, you know, listening to it, I still don't think it's something I'd put on in my car. Like, I really didn't realize how important these guys were. So big shout out to Hunter for, you know, fixing me on that. That's something a hole I definitely needed to fill in. The next major band that gets introduced is Minor Threat. Again, someone I've heard about a lot. I'm sure I've heard them, but they're not someone I own music by and I haven't listened to in my car. With Minor Threat also comes a discussion of straight edge, because apparently Ian MacKaye, one of the main founders of that band, the big figures there, was also one of the people who founded the straight edge community. The straight edge, if people don't know what that is, and this is going back to the late 80s here. I was more familiar with it like in the mid 90s. But straight edge here, the reality is being straight edge is the philosophy of ensuring you are always fully in control of your being and not letting some form of substance dictate your life. So straight edge was very much a no drugs, no alcohol, and then like the no sex is he even has it in here as a maybe. Our joke in high school was always that like the hardcore kids made up for not drinking and doing drugs and not having sex by cursing a lot and being really aggressive. I used to actually get mistaken for hardcore because I wasn't a band and I liked metal. And I wore a t-shirt that had a big X and a circle on it, which is the symbol of the straight edge. that they would wear on their shirts. But it was just the X from that Alex Ross series X that he did with John Paul Leon. Also, rest in peace to JPL. It was for that. It was for a Earth. It was an Earth X shirt, I think, is what that series was called. And so people mistook me for straight edge. Also, because I grew up in a Christian household, so I wasn't drinking or smoking or having sex. Wasn't doing any drugs. I didn't curse a lot until I was a little bit older. But the kind of value of this, like the philosophy of ensuring you are always in full control of yourself. And throughout this book, there's an idea that we talk about on the channel a lot of like the competent outsider, like the frustration with the system, but realizing there's no way to fix it. So fuck it, just go do it your own way. Like that ethic and mentality that I really feel like is one of my core operational commands. Definitely, I can see how it came out of the hardcore scene and especially the straight edge part. So in retrospect, like it makes sense that people were constantly assuming that I was that, because that was just in the air and I was picking up on it, and I still basically work that way. There's a little bit more explanation about straight edge here. Another thing to keep in mind with straight edge is they often use a single symbol to represent their lifestyle, the X, reminiscent of the X that would get marked on kids' hands at shows if you were under drinking age. So I had no idea about that, but they're taking that symbol of we don't drink and putting that on. I like that. That was an interesting bit of history I had no idea about. Anyway, much of the hardcore scene quickly adopted this lifestyle, and it became so prevalent that groups from outside the scene began to use that term. This is how Christians learned about and adopted the terminology of straight edge. And definitely my exposure to heavy music was primarily through the Christian hardcore scene, which was really big in the mid 90s. And I'll still argue that some of the best metal bands and hardcore bands were Christian hardcore bands. There was really a lot of good music that's still listened to, still influences me, I still love. And so it's really interesting to see how this completely secular kind of idea of self-control then set it up to have a similar value set as Christians, even though there wasn't the same belief set. And so again, it makes sense why all of this is so familiar to me and why it still seems to like ring true to like the things I think about when I'm living my life. And that this whole book really operated that way for me. It just really kind of said, man, this is like where your worldview came from. I mean, you kind of knew that, but not totally. And for a book to be able to do that, that's a pretty powerful thing. I don't know that it will have the same impact for someone who doesn't have all the same experiences, but I think as a piece of history, there's all of these other things in there that make it equally compelling. Hunter starts to explain the expansion of hardcore, moving from Washington, D.C. up into New York and creating the New York hardcore sound, and then eventually moving like further up into Massachusetts and Boston, places like that. As you move into like the real Northeast New England area, you get what he calls the youth crew. And these are people that were kind of like jocks who took on this hardcore mentality. When I think of hardcore, like that's very much like pure hardcore to me is very much like a New England vibe type of thing. And I think that's also captured really well in the book. In talking to Hunter, I actually assumed that he was from somewhere in New England because of how he carries himself and presents himself in the book. Just felt like someone drenched and saturated in that scene. That could be like a silly bias of mine, but there is something about like the really, really like pure hardcore bands that I always associate with that region, and like this like tough, real tough guy mentality versus, and this is something else. I'm gonna have to have an interview with Hunter. We're gonna have to talk about these things, but we're actually both guys that grew up in California, and I think that was definitely a little bit of a different flavor on that. It will also be interesting to talk to Hunter because I don't know exactly when he's just playing devil's advocate and when he's speaking for himself. So like here he's talking about as things move on from where he's at, like now we're in 1990, circa 1990, moving into California. He's saying past this point, like there's less of a consensus, and so it gets harder to talk about. And then he also talks about the things that branched out of hardcore that shouldn't exist, like the god awful crabcore. Metal and hardcore is very much into these like super thin slice genres with, barely telling the difference between them a lot of times, but people get really caught up into it. So I'll be interested because there's some bands that would qualify as crabcore, I'm sure, that I really really enjoy. I will be interesting to talk to Hunter and see, how many of those kind of bands he actually enjoys, because I'm getting the sense from the ending of the book and from talking to him that he has a wider variety of music than the purist that he suggests in this book. So throughout this whole time that he's telling this awesome history, he's explaining the history by basically having a chase through time. So that's a second component of the book that I haven't really touched on, even though it shows up kind of in between every chunk. But I think like as this starts to come to a culmination at the end, you really get a confirmation of what's pretty obvious throughout, is that as Hunter and the guy that he is taking through the history are interacting with the history, there's a potential that they're going to mess up a history. So then you get these people that are like keeper of the timeline come in, and they're hunting them down and trying to stop them from corrupting the history of hardcore. But you start to get the sense that this is all basically an allegory for the type of people that exist in any really like tightly defined genre, and any music that tends to come with the lifestyle tends to have these people that protect it very closely from outsiders. And there's definitely a bit of like, hey, by doing this book, like you're saying things that only insiders should know. And there's also very much this like clout thing of like, well, I'm a real hardcore person, like I've always been there, I've always known about that band, I didn't find out about it retroactively, like I was there, I lived it. And I know many women I talk to, especially, who enjoy heavy music and comics, by the way, video games, any of that type of stuff, really feel like they run into these gatekeeper guys pretty frequently. And I've experienced it as well. I think everyone's familiar with these characters where you're like, oh yeah, I like metal. And they're like, yeah, but you don't like real metal. And I'm sure I'm guilty of that too. It's like students tell me they like metal, and it's like, yeah, like how heavy? Are you talking Metallica, or, what are we talking here? So he's talking about that gatekeeper function, and then also that there's a gatekeeping function with the history. He acknowledges many points in the book that like many of the bands also understand their place in history, and so there's conflicting tales about how bands broke up or who was the most important, who influenced who, and that as someone going back and like doing research, that's hard to pick out. And so he's very much acknowledging that with these gatekeeper figures. And there's two bits of dialogue here that I think sum that up very well. So you have one of the gatekeepers. You're so clearly warping the facts to fit your narrative. I did what I had to keep hardcore alive. Without what I did, we never would have had the likes of Power Trip, Have Heart, Hatebreed, Turnstile. Turnstile probably being the most recent entry. Really good band. All of them. Without me, hardcore wouldn't be what it is today. Not by a long shot. And I wouldn't let someone run through history saying otherwise. And then here you have Hunter replying, because of him, hardcore isn't even growing. When was the last time you checked in on the present state of hardcore? That's because it doesn't exist. Hardcore has all but begun to die out. And there's like kind of competing arguments there. The one guy is saying like, hey, the reason it's dying out is it's not pure anymore. It's been intermixed with too many different things. And like for me personally, that's one of the things I like most about heavy music is very eager to assimilate everything else. You can get like Japanese K-pop metal band and any stupid combination that you can think of. Someone's out there doing it and making it good and interesting. Yeah, but so there's like this, you're not letting it grow. Of course it's dying, it's stagnant. You can't play the same sound out. But as you let something grow and morph, it's going to become something else. Like obviously hardcore grew out of like punk and metal and rock and rap and all of this. And so if you're holding it too stagnant, like it's going to fade. Like the sound's no longer capturing the zeitgeist. And so Hunter's making the argument here, like, hey, like let new voices come in, let new things happen, let the music evolve, and quit holding on so hard to the purity of the core of how this began, and quit trying to control the history to preserve that legacy or whatever. So, but he's also aware of like this kind of conflict. He's pulled in both ways, and that plays out really interestingly as the book comes to a close. You can see all these notes in it that I've skipped past. Those are all notes of like bands, both bands that I definitely have heard of, some bands that I've listened to, and a lot of like, this is the band these people were in before they joined the popular band that you've heard of. So a really, really cool piece here that has got me going and listening to lots of different music. Some cool pinups in the back, as well as like a playlist of, hey, like if you've never listened to hardcore before, or like for someone like me, who's aware of it but like hasn't like really dived into that older scene, there's a lot of stuff here for me to go listen to, like recommended songs. So this is part of the reason I was saying it really reminds me of Ed's Hip Hop Family Tree. Is that book did the same thing for me? Like I know hip hop starting from a certain point, and it brought me up to that point, and kind of filled in everything that came before that I kind of knew of. It gave me a bunch of songs to go check out. There's a bunch of artists and songs that I never would have heard of if it wasn't for that book. And I think the history of hardcore is very much the same thing, just for a different music genre. It's obvious that Hunter himself is still very engaged in the community. He's always showing himself with the X shirt on, and he talks about that he himself considers himself straight edge, but he's also aware that like straight edge people, and this is very much my impression of them, that they're super militant about it. That they're very judgmental of other people for not having the same control over themselves as the straight edge people have. And he's pretty like dismissive of that as a bad thing, which was always where I was like, I don't know, man. Like, yeah, that's what I believe, but like take it with the grain of salt. I think maybe me and Hunter also coming from California, and this is something else I'm curious to talk to him about, is it seems like California, like all the stuff that was influential to me is where the grain of salt got introduced. Like when you take Faith No More and Primus, the stuff that became like the new metal, there was a little bit more of a grain of salt at the beginning of that. And it looks like there was some grain of salt at the beginning of hardcore. So it's interesting, and I really, I was really excited by this. Obviously, the way I'm going on about it, I think it's a book everyone should read. And I've been having some really good conversations with Hunter, so I'll get an interview by him, and that should be up the day after I post this video. I'm going to hang on to this till we have an interview with Hunter. So check in tomorrow for what should be a really awesome conversation, probably more about music than comics, but the intersection between music and comics, which this book also opened up some ideas about how we can explore that more on the channel, because that's a big part of my interest in comics, is driven by my interest in music. So I think we're going to look for ways to start incorporating that in and add a little bit of new aspect to what we're doing here on Living the Line. So thanks for watching this video. Definitely go get yourself a copy of this awesome book, The History of Hardcore by Hunter Delaney. House on Fire by Matt Battaglia is a just gorgeous book where Matt's kind of making an emotional response to the years of COVID and wrapping that into a sci-fi dystopian future that really the sci-fi dystopian's backgrounded, and you're focused on the emotional journey of two characters in a really beautiful way. And then that's enhanced by Matt's like really awesome, loose, kind of Paul Popish dry brush work. And then Sean and Matt have worked to get this second kind of orange spot color in there that's going to look really, really beautiful, and has allowed Matt to use his dry brush technique to add tone to the thing too. So with Sean's production technique, this is going to be a gorgeous book with a lot of heart.